The morning light filtered gently through the curtains, casting soft golden hues across the room. The scent of freshly brewed coffee filled the air, mixing with the earthy aroma of the morning rain. The steady hum of the kettle was the only sound, a peaceful start to what should have been another ordinary day. At the kitchen table, the protagonist sat, a man in his late 30s, dressed in the simplicity of his morning routine. His worn, yet comfortable shirt, a gift from his wife. On their last anniversary, was a reminder of the years they had spent together. He was a hard-working man, his dedication to his family evident in the steady rhythm of his day's work, home, family, repeat. He had earned the respect of his colleagues and peers. A man known for his integrity, his steady hand in the face of challenges. But most of all, he was proud of his marriage. His wife entered the room with a warm smile, her eyes reflecting the quiet love that had grown between them over the years. She handed him his cup, her fingers brushing against his. The simple gesture was enough to ignite a warmth in his chest, reminding him of the countless mornings they had shared, the quiet moments of connection that had defined their life together. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee mingled with the crispness of the air, creating a sense of comfort that wrapped around him like a familiar embrace. He took a sip, the warmth of the coffee spreading through him, and allowed himself a moment to savor the stillness of the morning. His wife, always attentive, sat down beside him, her laughter filling the space as they exchanged small talk, the comfortable rhythm of their conversation flowing effortlessly. The weight of the outside world seemed to vanish in those moments, leaving only the two of them together, safe, secure. But even in the midst of this calm, there was a subtle undercurrent, something unspoken between them. He was unaware of it, caught in the peace of the morning, but it lingered. A quiet tension that would soon shatter their world. He looked at his wife, the woman who had been his partner, his confidant, his love.
Oh.
And in that fleeting moment, he couldn't have imagined how quickly everything would change. The days had started to blur together. He had grown accustomed to the rhythm of his life work, family, home, but recently, something had felt off. The quiet, reassuring presence of his wife seemed to be fading, replaced by a strange distance that he couldn't explain.
At first.
He chalked it up to stress at work, or perhaps the demands of daily life. Everyone had their moments of being distant, right? But as the days passed, the small oddities began to add up. It wasn't just that she was coming home later than usual or spending more time on the phone. He could feel it in the air when he walked through the door. One evening, and after another long day at work, he opened the front door to their home. Usual warmth of the house was absent, replaced by a chill that seemed to hang in the air. He stepped inside, the familiar creak of the floorboards beneath his feet offering little comfort. His wife was sitting at the kitchen counter, a cup of tea in her hands, but something was different. She wasn't smiling. There was no energy in her posture, no enthusiasm in her greeting. "Hey," she said, her voice distant, almost mechanical. She didn't look up from her cup as she spoke. "Hey," he replied, setting his keys down with a frown. He watched her for a moment, waiting for the usual spark in her eyes. But it wasn't there. A slight unease began to settle in his stomach. She didn't meet his gaze. Her eyes seemed to drift to something else, anything else. He caught the briefest flicker of discomfort in her expression before she quickly masked it with a half-hearted smile. It was like she was trying to convince both of them that everything was fine, but the smile didn't reach her eyes. And that, more than anything, unsettled him. He could feel the weight of the silence between them, the unspoken words lingering like an invisible presence in the room. Her reluctance to make eye contact, the stiff way she held her body, all felt wrong. Was it just him? Was he imagining it? Later that evening, he noticed the phone calls. They were brief, quiet conversations that she seemed to take in private, always retreating to another room when she spoke. Her words were never loud enough for him to overhear. But the sudden changes in behavior, the secrecy, he couldn't ignore it any longer. He had always prided himself on his trust in her, but now doubt crept in like an unwanted shadow. He tried to dismiss it, tried to convince himself that it was nothing, just the stresses of life catching up. But as the days wore on, the cracks, And their relationship grew wider, and the unease gnawed at him. A constant reminder that something wasn't right. It was a typical evening. He had returned from work, tired, but still carrying the hope that maybe, just maybe, they could salvage the day. As he stepped inside, he noticed his wife wasn't in the kitchen or living room, which was unusual. Her car was parked outside, but she was nowhere to be seen. He heard muffled voices from the study, a low murmur that grew clearer as he approached. He paused by the doorway, not intending to intrude, but something stopped him. The tone of his wife's voice was unmistakable. It wasn't the voice he knew, the warm, affectionate sound he'd grown accustomed to over the years. This was different. There was a coldness to it, an edge that felt alien. He didn't want to eavesdrop, but the words froze him in place. "Yes, I've already told him." His wife's voice rang out, sharp and filled with resolve. "I'll make sure everything lines up. The bruises, the emotional scars. We'll never see it coming." The voice on the other end of the phone responded, but he couldn't make out the words. All he could hear was the pounding of his heart in his chest as he leaned in closer, struggling to comprehend what he was hearing. The next words, though, struck him like a physical blow. "Asterisk, he's nothing but worthless garbage," she said, her tone venomous. "No one will believe him over me. So I'll have everything I need to make sure he's done for." His breath hitched, the sharpness of her words cutting into him like a knife. The room seemed to close in on him, the walls constricting as the world around him became distant, unreal. He could feel his pulse quicken, his hands trembling as he pressed his back against the doorframe for support. The weight of her words hung in the air, suffocating him. Worthless garbage. Those words echoed in his mind, repeating over and over. He could feel the blood rush to his head, the heat of anger slowly rising in his chest, followed by an overwhelming sense of disbelief. The world he thought he knew, the woman he trusted, had been living a lie, one so cruel, so calculated, that it tore at the very fabric of their relationship. His stomach churned as the full weight of the betrayal hit him. This wasn't just a simple misunderstanding. This was a deliberate, malicious attempt to destroy him. She wasn't just planning to hurt him. She was planning to ruin his life. She had been doing it with cold, meticulous precision. All this time, he had trusted her, believed in her love, only to have it torn down in an instant. He stepped back from the door, his heart pounding in his chest as he tried to process what he had just heard. The room seemed to spin, and the air, once so familiar and comforting, now felt heavy and suffocating. The sharp taste of bile rose in his throat. His calm facade, the man who had once been confident, strong, and steady, began to crack. Anger, confusion, and betrayal surged within him. How could she? How could the woman he had loved, the woman he had trusted with everything, do something so utterly cruel? His mind raced, questions spiraling out of control. But amidst the chaos, one thought stood above the rest. This was no longer about him being wronged. It was about him surviving, about reclaiming the control she had stolen from him. The confrontation came like a storm breaking through a clear sky, sudden and violent, yet inevitable. He stood at the doorway of their bedroom, his mind a whirlwind of disbelief and raw emotion. His breath came in shallow gasps as he tried to steady himself. He had heard the truth, and now he was faced with the one person who had shattered it. His wife was sitting at the edge of the bed, her back turned to him as she flipped through a magazine. An image of calm masking the chaos that raged beneath. She didn't hear him approach. He could see her hands trembling slightly, as if she knew something was about to change. But she didn't yet know how deep the cracks ran. His voice, when it came, was barely a whisper, cracking under the weight of his words. "Is it true?" Asterisk, she didn't turn around. The silence stretched between them, thick and suffocating, hanging in the air like a fog. He took a step closer, his chest tight, his heart thundering in his ears. "I heard you," continued, his voice barely audible, "talking about me, about ruining my life, about making up stories, to destroy me." Still, she said, nothing. The world around him felt distorted, as if everything had suddenly shifted into slow motion. The tears in his eyes blurred his vision, turning the room into an indistinct blur. His mind couldn't grasp the magnitude of her betrayal. He was drowning in confusion, fighting to keep his composure. Why? The word broke from him, fragile and desperate, hanging in the air like a plea. He had never imagined the woman he had loved, trusted with everything, could turn against him so callously. His legs trembled beneath him, as if the weight of her actions had drained him of all strength. The silence stretched on. Coldness in her back, the unspoken distance between them, was suffocating. His breath hitched, and his chest tightened as if his heart had been ripped open. The tears began to fall, each one carrying the weight of 100 unanswered questions. He took another step forward, his body trembling. "How could you?" His voice cracked, the pain in his words too much to bear. "How could you do this to me?" Finally she turned, her face a mask of indifference, as if his heartbreak didn't even register. There was no apology, no guilt, just an emptiness in her eyes that made him feel more alone than he had ever felt in his life. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, her voice cool, as though she hadn't just torn apart everything they had built. Her words landed like ice, each syllable driving a jagged knife deeper into his chest. The weight of her betrayal pressed down on him, suffocating him, making him feel like he was losing control of everything. He could feel the ache in his chest growing, an unbearable pain that made it hard to breathe, hard to think. She was still there, sitting in front of him, but somehow she felt miles away. The pain was overwhelming, crushing, and he collapsed onto the bed beside her, unable to hold himself together any longer. His tears came in a relentless stream, a raw, guttural release of all the hurt he had been holding in. The man who had once prided himself on his strength, his control, was broken. Her silence was worse than any words she could have said. It was the absence of empathy, of love, that tore him apart. He had given her everything, trusted her with his heart, and in return, she had cast him aside like a stranger. The betrayal wasn't just in her actions, it was in the coldness of her gaze, the emptiness of her touch, the indifference with which she now treated him. He looked at her, his heart in pieces, his voice barely a whisper. "How could you do this to me?" And once again, she said nothing. Leaving him alone in the quiet storm of his heartbreak, the tears had stopped flowing. And in their place, something colder, something darker, began to settle inside him. The heartache that had consumed him only hours ago slowly transformed into a fire of rage. The disbelief that had crippled him turned into a sharpened focus. The man who had been so vulnerable was no longer there. In his place stood someone else. Someone was determined to right the wrong that had been done to him. He sat in the dim light of the living room, the quiet hum of the air conditioner, the only sound in the otherwise still house. The sharp contrast between the oppressive silence and the storm raging inside him only fueled his growing fury. His hands trembled slightly as he opened his laptop, the weight of his thoughts pressing on him. He needed to do this. He needed to expose her lies, to make her feel the weight of what she had done. But this time, it wouldn't be messy. It wouldn't be an emotional outburst. It would be methodical, precise, cold. The clicking of his fingers on the keyboard filled the room, each tap a reminder that he was no longer a victim. He was in control now. He didn't need to shout, didn't need to beg. He would use the tools at his disposal, the technology she had no idea was lurking in the background. To make sure she could never lie her way out of this, he set up the hidden cameras around their house, each one carefully placed where she would never notice. He knew her routines, when she'd be in the kitchen, when she'd retreat into their bedroom, when she'd have her private conversations. He didn't need to rush this. Everything had to be perfect. The familiar sound of the clicking keyboard became a rhythmic soundtrack to his plotting, the tiny blinking light of the cameras in the corners of the rooms. Silent witnesses to her, deceived her, him a strange kind of comfort. This was it. This was how he would reclaim control, how he would prove to her, to himself, that he wasn't the fool she thought he was. As he finalized the setup, he leaned back in his chair and stared at the blank screen, his mind turning over every detail. The plan was simple. Once he had enough evidence, he would confront her. She would have nowhere to hide. The lies would be exposed, and the truth would be laid bare for everyone to see. She would never have the power to manipulate him again. The calm, cool precision of his planning settled over him like a shroud, and the anger that had been boiling beneath the surface now had a direction. He wasn't just angry anymore. He was calculating, focused. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about regaining the power she had taken from him, about ensuring that no one would ever believe her again. He took a deep breath, staring at the rows of code on his screen. His fingers hovered over the mouse, but for the first time in days, he felt a sense of clarity. He wasn't lost in the chaos of emotion anymore. He was in control. The quiet hum of the air conditioner, the ticking of the clock on the wall, all faded into the background as he crafted the final details of his plan. The woman he had loved, the woman who had so easily discarded him, would soon learn that betrayal had consequences, and he would be the one to ensure she never forgot that. The house had never felt so still, so silent. The usual hum of family life, laughter, small talk, the mundane moments that filled the spaces between the important ones was gone. Now, there was only the quiet buzz of hidden cameras capturing every moment. The protagonist moved with a precision that felt almost mechanical, setting up each camera in its place, making sure they were perfectly positioned, hidden from view. The worry sound of the camera starting to record was almost inaudible. But to him, it was the sound of inevitability. It wasn't just about capturing her lies. It was about control. For the first time since the betrayal, he felt a strange calm wash over him. This wasn't the frantic, emotional reaction of a man wronged. This was the focused, deliberate movement of someone who had calculated every step, who had become the architect of his own vindication. He stood in the living room, staring at the camera in the corner of the room. A small red light blinking silently, recording everything. He couldn't help but smile, just slightly. This was how it would be. He wouldn't confront her in anger. He wouldn't give her the satisfaction of seeing his pain. He would let her continue with her game, unaware that every word, every action was now being captured for the world to see. As the days passed, footage began to unfold before him like a puzzled, small, insignificant moments that, when put together, painted a clear picture of betrayal. He watched her retreat into the bedroom with her phone, speaking softly to someone he couldn't hear. Her smile as she made plans, the glint of something dark in her eyes as she spoke about how easy it would be to manipulate the situation. The way she looked at him when he entered the room, pretending everything was fine, while behind the facade she was plotting his destruction. He wasn't angry anymore. The fury that had once raged inside him had been replaced with something colder, more detached. He could feel the shift in himself, the way he had become someone entirely different. A man driven not by emotion, but by purpose. He had become a shadow in his own home, a silent observer of the life that once was his, but now belonged to someone else. The footage was chilling, subtle, almost imperceptible ways she had been manipulating him, turning the world against him. The careful way she played her part, putting on the mask of a loving wife, all while planning his downfall. He could see it all now, the small, significant details that had once seemed like nothing more than passing moments, now laid out before him in full clarity. He didn't need to confront her yet. He wasn't in a rush. He was patient. Every piece of this puzzle was falling into place, and when it was time, when he had gathered enough evidence, he would strike. She would never see it coming. The protagonist sat back, watching the footage, his fingers tapping rhythmically on the edge of the desk. The once warm, loving home now felt like a cold, distant place, filled with the echoes of lies and manipulation. The house was no longer his sanctuary. It was the stage for his carefully calculated revenge. There was no more room for emotion. He had become a spectator in his own life, watching the destruction unfold from a distance, all the while knowing that he was the one who would control the final act. The room was dim, illuminated only by the cold, sterile glow of the laptop screen. The ticking of the clock on the wall was a constant in the silence, each second stretching into eternity as he sat in front of the footage, his eyes glued to the screen. His fingers hovered over the mouse, trembling slightly as he clicked through. The video's every frame he watched brought him closer to the truth, the full, undeniable extent of his wife's betrayal. He could feel the pulse in his chest quicken with each passing moment, the dread mingling with a strange, dark sense of satisfaction. There was no longer any question in his mind. He wasn't wrong. He had been right all along. The woman he had loved had been planning his destruction. Her every word laced with cruelty, her every action aimed at taking everything he had worked for. The footage was more than just evidence, it was proof of the manipulation, the deceit that had been hidden beneath the surface for so long. The cold glow of the screen reflected off his face, casting a ghostly pallor over him as he watched her speak those venomous words, planning her lies with a calmness that made his blood boil. She had thought she could get away with it, thought she could destroy him with no consequences. But now he could see it all. He watched as she spoke to her friend, detailing the steps she had planned, how she would frame him for abuse, how she would twist the truth, how she would use their past to manipulate the people around them. Could hear the malicious satisfaction in her voice as she talked about how easy it would be, how nobody would believe him over her. His hand tightened on the mouse, his fingers pressing down hard as the anger surged through him once again. This time darker, more controlled. His stomach twisted with disgust, not just at what she had done, but at how icily she had done it. How icily she had destroyed everything they had built. He could feel the bile rising in his throat, but it was no longer about the pain. No. Now, it was about something else. This wasn't just about revenge. This was about exposing her for who she really was, the woman who had called him worthless garbage, the woman who had betrayed him, who had tried to ruin his life. She had underestimated him, underestimated his capacity to fight back, and now he was about to make her pay for it. There was no more conflict within him, no more hesitation. The rage that had once burned out of control had now settled into something colder, more deliberate. He was no longer the man he had been before. He was no longer a victim. He was a predator, and she was his prey. As the footage continued to play, he felt a sense of dark satisfaction wash over him. This was it. The moment of truth was almost here. The evidence was irrefutable. She wouldn't be able to talk her way out of this. She wouldn't be able to hide behind her lies any longer. With one final click, he stopped the video, leaned back in his chair, and exhaled slowly. He was calm now, focused, ready. The confrontation would come soon, and when it did, there would be no mercy. The tension in the house was palpable, thicker than it had ever been before. The walls seemed to close in on him as he stood in front of her, the moment of reckoning finally at hand. His hands were steady, his voice calm, though a storm raged beneath the surface. There would be no more hiding, no more pretending. He was done being the man who had been deceived. Now, he would be the one in control. His wife sat on the couch, her usual confident posture replaced with a stiff unease. She didn't know yet what was coming, but he could see the subtle changes in her, a slight flicker of anxiety in her eyes. The way her fingers tapped nervously against the armrest, she must have felt a tooth of shifting energy between them, the finality of the moment. He took a deep breath, the air heavy with the weight of his thoughts. This was it, the moment where everything would finally come to light. You want to tell me why you've been lying? His voice was low, calm, almost a calm. The edge of his anger was buried beneath the surface, but it was there, just waiting to break free. She looked up at him, her face betraying nothing but the familiar, cold indifference. What are you talking about? She replied, her voice as smooth as ever. But he could hear the faintest quiver in it, the crack in the facade she had so carefully maintained. He didn't respond immediately. Instead, he walked over to the table and grabbed his laptop, slowly, deliberately. He opened the video file, the one he had watched so many times already. Her face flashed on the screen as the footage began to play, her voice cold and calculating as she outlined the lies, the betrayal, the words she had spoken to her friend, the ones that had burned in his mind since he first heard them echoed through the room. He's worthless garbage, she had said. No one will believe him over me. I'll make sure he's done for. The sound of her voice filled the room, a cruel reminder of everything she had planned. The sharpness of her words cut into him again, and for a brief moment, He felt the sting of the betrayal all over again. But this time, it was different. This time, the truth was in his hands. He wasn't the man who had been deceived anymore. He was the one holding the power. Face slowly went pale as she watched herself on the screen. The mask that she had worn for so long began to crack, and in the silence that followed, he could see her slowly realizing that she had been caught. Her mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. "You planned this, didn't you?" he said, his voice cold now. "You thought you could destroy me? You thought you could get away with it?" She didn't respond, her eyes fixed on the screen. She was cornered, and she knew it. The air between them crackled with tension, the weight of her guilt hanging like an oppressive cloud. The confrontation wasn't what he had imagined. There was no shouting, no dramatic outburst. The truth, raw and undeniable, hung between them like a ghost. Her facade shattered, piece by piece, as the reality of her lies sank in. He stared at her, waiting for her to say something, anything, but all she did was look at him, her eyes wide with shock and disbelief. It was a strange feeling watching her unravel like this. The anger, the pain, the betrayal, they all seemed distant now, muted in the face of this cold. Inevitable revelation. There was no joy in this moment, no satisfaction in watching her crumble. There was only emptiness, a hollow victory that left him feeling as lost as he had before. The woman he had once loved, the woman he had trusted, was nothing more than a stranger now. He didn't need to say anything more. The truth was laid bare, and with it, the final chapter of their story was written. He closed the laptop with a slow, deliberate motion, the sound of the lid snapping shut echoing in the room. There was nothing left to say. The silence that followed the confrontation was deafening. The air felt colder, heavier, as if the very room itself had absorbed the weight of the lies that had been exposed. The absence of her presence was felt more profoundly than his anger had ever been. Once a home, now felt like a hollow, empty, devoid of the warmth and love that had once filled it. He stood there, watching as his wife gathered her things, moving in a slow, mechanical rhythm. There was no shouting, no defense, no further attempts to deny what had been laid bare. She had nothing left to say. The facade she had so carefully built over the years had crumbled, and with it, everything they had shared. Her movements were stiff, her eyes vacant, as though she were a stranger in the very place she had once called home. He didn't need to say anything more. There was nothing left to say. The truth had already been revealed, and the consequences of her betrayal were beginning to unfold before him. Outside, he could hear the sounds of neighbors talking, whispers carried on the wind. The community, once sympathetic to her, was now turning against her. The damage had been done. Her lies, exposed to the light of truth, had left her isolated, her reputation shattered. There was no longer any doubt in anyone's mind. She had been caught, and the price of her deception was now being paid. As she packed her things, her movements slow and deliberate, he couldn't help but feel a strange mix of emotions. Part of him felt relief, a dark satisfaction that the revenge he had so carefully planned had been executed. But the relief was fleeting, quickly overshadowed by a gnawing emptiness that settled in his chest. She was leaving, and with her departure, a piece of his life went too. The home that had once been filled with the echoes of shared laughter, the quiet moments of love, was now eerily still. The ghost of their past hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. He didn't watch her leave. He couldn't bring himself to. Instead, he turned away, retreating to the solitary silence of his room, where the cold emptiness wrapped around him like a shroud. There was no joy in victory, only a hollow sense of finality. As he sat in the dark, his mind drifted to the moments that had led to this point. The trust he had given so freely, the love he had offered without question, had it all been so easily destroyed? And for what? Revenge? Justice, or something darker? He could feel the weight of it all pressing down on him, suffocating him. Yes, he had exposed the truth. Yes, he had taken back the power she had stolen. But at what cost? The pain, the heartbreak, the betrayal still lingered. The walls of his house had been rebuilt with cold, calculated precision, but they didn't bring warmth. They didn't bring peace. He had won, but in the end, the victory was as empty as the house around him. The revenge had been necessary, he told himself. But as the last of her footsteps echoed through the door, he realized something he hadn't fully grasped before. Revenge was not the answer. It had brought no closure, no healing, only a quiet, empty finality. The house was quiet now, the kind of silence that filled the spaces between the walls, settling into every corner like a forgotten memory. He sat in the living room, the soft, rhythmic ticking of the clock on the wall, the only sound in the stillness. It marked the passing of time, yet each tick felt like a reminder of everything that had happened, the weight of the last few weeks. Pressing on his chest, the air felt colder, though the day outside was warm. The absence of her was felt more than anything her presence. Once a familiar part of every room was now a ghost that lingered in the shadows. He ran his fingers over the surface of the coffee table, tracing the path of a line that had once been a small, shared joke between them. How many mornings had they sat together there? How many conversations had they shared? Now, all of that felt like it belonged to someone else, someone he used to know. He leaned back in his chair, his eyes wandering over the room. The walls, once adorned with memories, felt barren now. The faded warmth of the photos, the moments, frozen in time, seemed like distant echoes of a life that no longer existed. They had once shared a future together, built on trust and love, but now that future had been shattered, and with it, so much of what he had believed in. A strange calm had settled over him, a stillness that was both unsettling and necessary. The storm that had consumed him for so long had passed, leaving behind only the wreckage of the life he had once known. He had taken revenge. He had exposed the lies, the betrayal, and the manipulation. And in doing so, he had reclaimed a sense of power he had lost. But there was no joy in it, no satisfaction. The silence seemed to stretch endlessly before him, and with it came the bitter realization that vengeance had not healed the wounds, it had only deepened them. He had been right to expose her lies, but he was no longer the man who had been wronged. He was someone else, someone scarred by what had happened, someone who would never see the world the same way again. He had won, but at what cost? The victory felt hollow, a fleeting moment of triumph in a sea of destruction. He had learned that sometimes the greatest revenge was simply surviving, moving forward, but that didn't mean the past would ever truly leave him. The house felt emptier now, the memories of love, of laughter, now tainted with the harsh reality of betrayal. He was left with the remnants of what had once been, trying to piece together a future that no longer felt like his own. He knew that moving on would take time, that the healing, if it ever came, would be slow. But in that moment, with the ticking of the clock and the stillness of the house surrounding him, he realized that he had done what he had to do. The past would always haunt him, but he would move forward. He would survive. And that, in itself, was enough.